In the summer of 1980, a young rookie police officer walked out of her small apartment for the night shift. She never came home. Her patrol car was found abandoned. Her radio went silent, and for 21 years there was no trace of her. No badge, no weapon, nothing. The case turned into a ghost story inside the department, a warning whispered to new recruits. Most believed the truth would never be found. But in 2001, everything changed. A construction crew digging for a new housing project slammed their bulldozer into something buried just a few feet below the dirt. At first, they thought it was scrap metal, but when they pulled it out, their blood ran cold. It wasn't junk. It was her service weapon, and the secrets that gun revealed would tear apart everything. The town thought it knew about loyalty, trust, and the badge itself. Eyes, what do you think? Was she betrayed by a stranger, or by someone wearing the same uniform? Let me know your theory in the comments below. And if you want the full story, make sure to stick around till the very end. In the summer of 1980, a young woman finally reached her dream. She had just graduated from the academy and put on the badge for the very first time. She was only a rookie, but to her, that badge meant everything. It was proof that she had worked harder than anyone believed she could. Her family was proud of her. Friends described her as kind, disciplined, and maybe even too trusting. She was the type of person who always wanted to help. If someone was struggling, she would stop what she was doing and make sure they were okay. It was that heart that made her perfect for the job. But the job was not easy. Older officers warned her that the streets could change people. They told her that sometimes criminals weren't the only danger. Sometimes the badge itself came with shadows. She listened, but she still believed she could handle it. She was eager. Every patrol felt like a test she had to pass. She wrote notes, studied her reports, and wanted to prove she belonged in uniform. She wasn't tough-looking. She wasn't intimidating, but she had courage, and she thought that would be enough. To her family, she was still the same young woman who came home for Sunday dinners, smiling and talking about the future. She wanted to move up, maybe become a detective one day. She had no idea that her first summer on the force would also be her last. She lived in a small one-bedroom apartment just a few blocks from the police station. It wasn't fancy. The walls were bare except for one framed academy photo, her in uniform, smiling with her class. Her apartment told a story about who she was. Her desk was always neat, training manuals stacked in order, a notebook filled with her handwriting, reminders about radio codes, procedures, and officer safety tips. On the fridge were schedules she had written out, shift times, fitness goals, meal plans. She believed discipline would keep her safe. Her closet was simple, 2 uniforms cleaned and pressed, shoes polished, her belt neatly hanging beside her bed. Everything had its place. It looked like she was building her life from the ground up, carefully and with pride. But the apartment also showed her youth. A small plant by the window that she always forgot to water, a few photos taped to the mirror of her with friends at a lake, a stuffed animal from her childhood still sitting on a shelf. She was a mix of rookie cop and ordinary young woman trying to hold onto pieces of home. That night she returned briefly to her apartment before her shift. She checked her uniform again, even though it was already perfect. She wrote down the date in her notebook, as if marking another step forward in her career. To her, it was just another night of work. But the truth was, it would be the last time she ever set foot inside that apartment. She walked into the station that night just before her shift began. The building was noisy, filled with phones ringing and radios buzzing. Veteran officers moved quickly, laughing with each other, trading stories. She was still the new face, polite, nervous, eager to fit in. Some of the older cops teased her, calling her rookie, but it wasn't cruel. They remembered their own first years. She smiled, laughed at their jokes, and tried to act confident, even though she was still learning every day. She signed in, checked her patrol car, and made sure her equipment was in place. Radio, flashlight, notebook, sidearm, all accounted for. She moved carefully, the way she had been taught. To her, this was serious. To the veterans, it was routine. One officer patted her on the shoulder as she walked out. "Stay safe," he said, almost casually. She nodded and smiled, not realizing those would be some of the last words she'd ever hear from a fellow cop. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, just a quiet patrol, but within hours, that shift would become the beginning of one of the darkest mysteries the department had ever faced. Out on patrol, the rookie drove slowly down dark, empty streets. It was quiet, nothing unusual, just another routine night. She checked in with dispatch over the radio. Her voice was calm, professional. She reported her location, gave her status, and waited for confirmation. To anyone listening, it was completely normal, just a rookie doing her job. Then after that call, the radio went silent. Minutes passed, other officers checked in. They gave their updates, laughed about small things, and kept moving. But the rookie didn't speak again. At first, nobody noticed. She was new. Maybe she was being extra careful. Maybe she didn't have anything to report. But soon, dispatch tried to reach her again. No answer. They tried once more. Still nothing. Radio chatter began to slow as officers realized she wasn't responding. One of the veterans asked if her unit was close by. Another officer offered to swing past her last known area. Still, nothing. Her car wasn't on the main roads. She wasn't checking in at stops. It was as if she had vanished mid-shift. For a department that lived on constant chatter, the silence was deafening. Radios buzzed, but no rookie voice came back. Something was wrong. Hours later, an officer searching the back roads finally spotted something. Parked on the shoulder near a patch of woods was the rookie's patrol car. He pulled up slowly, headlights shining across the vehicle. The car looked intact. No crash, no damage, the engine was off. He stepped closer. The driver's door was unlocked. The keys were still inside. The radio was working, but the seat was empty. Other units rushed to the scene. Flashlights swept across the road, into the trees, across ditches. There was no sign of her. Her clipboard was still in the car. Her notes were neat, as if she had just written them. But her sidearm, the service pistol every officer carried, was missing. Her badge was gone too. It was as if she had stepped out of the vehicle and disappeared into the night. Officers fanned out, searching the woods. They shouted her name, called over radios, checked the ditches and streams. Nothing. The car was the first real clue, but it didn't make sense. No struggle, no footprints leading away, no sign of where she had gone. One moment she was patrolling. The next, her car sat abandoned on a lonely road. And the rookie herself was nowhere to be found. As officers examined her car, the most disturbing detail came to light. Her duty belt was there, but the holster was empty. Her gun, her only real protection, was gone. And her badge, the symbol of her position, was missing too. For a cop, this was unthinkable. No officer simply removes their weapon and badge in the middle of a shift. If both were gone, it could mean only two things. Either she gave them up willingly, or someone forced them away from her. Detectives crouched around the patrol car, shining flashlights under the seats, into the trunk, even across the dirt beside the road. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood, just a car that looked completely normal except for what was missing. One officer whispered the fear they were all thinking. If she lost her gun, she's in real trouble. The department knew criminals sometimes targeted cops, but this case felt different. Whoever had taken her weapon and badge wanted more than just robbery. It was a statement, a way of stripping her identity as an officer, erasing her authority in one move. The night air grew heavier as they stood by that abandoned car. A rookie officer had disappeared. Her weapon and badge were gone, and nobody had any idea where she was. Back at the station, the silence turned into chaos. Word spread fast. The rookie wasn't just late. She wasn't avoiding calls. She was missing, gone without a trace, and her gun was out there with her. Officers who had laughed with her hours earlier now sat stunned. The shift that should have been ordinary had become a nightmare. Calls went out. Search teams formed. Radios buzzed with clipped, urgent voices. Everyone knew what was at stake. A cop had vanished in the dark. And this time, the danger wasn't out there somewhere. It had already swallowed one of their own. The moment the rookie's empty car was found, the radio came alive. Sirens screamed across the county. Patrol cars shot through the dark, red and blue lights bouncing off houses, fields, and trees. Every officer was called in. No one stayed home. This wasn't just another call, this was one of their own. The search started right where her car sat on the roadside. Flashlights cut through the grass. Officers lined up shoulder to shoulder, moving through the woods like a human wall. They shouted her name into the night. Nothing came back. Only silence. Detectives retraced her last radio call. They checked every street she was supposed to patrol. They knocked on doors, asked neighbors if they had seen her car, heard gunshots, or noticed anything strange. Most people had been asleep. No one knew anything. The longer the silence stretched, the heavier the air became. Officers who were usually calm now paced nervously. Some yelled in frustration. Others whispered the question nobody wanted to say out loud. What if she's already gone? Still, they pushed forward. Every corner, every street, every dark alley. Patrol cars circled again and again, tires screeching on wet pavement. The rookie had vanished, and the whole department was tearing the night apart to find her. By dawn, the search had grown into one of the biggest manhunts the county had ever seen. Helicopters rose into the sky, sweeping the ground below with blinding spotlights. The beams cut across forests, rivers, and abandoned fields. From above, everything looked endless. But still, no trace of her. On the ground, bloodhounds were brought in. Officers handed the dogs pieces of her clothing from the apartment. The animals barked and pulled hard, noses pressed to the dirt, eager to follow the trail. They dragged their handlers down dirt roads, across small bridges, and into wooded gullies. But the trails kept breaking. The dogs would circle, whine, and sit down, confused. It was as if her scent had been cut off, erased. Officers searched creeks and streams. They climbed fences, combed through tall grass, even opened barns and sheds on rural farms. Every door was checked. Every shadow was examined. But it was like chasing smoke. The sun climbed higher, lighting up the countryside. Exhausted officers wiped sweat from their faces, but they didn't stop. Not for food, not for rest, not until they had something. Yet the result was always the same. Nothing. No footprints, no clothes, no weapon. Not a single sign of where she went. The rookie hadn't just disappeared. She had been swallowed by the night. As the hours turned into days, the search stretched farther. Roadblocks went up on every major highway. Officers flagged down cars, flashlights in drivers' faces, checking trunks, asking questions. Did you see a young officer in uniform? Did you pass a parked patrol car on the roadside? Did you notice anything strange last night? Most drivers shook their heads, confused and scared. Some said they thought they had seen flashing lights or maybe a dark car parked nearby. But when officers checked, nothing was there. Tips poured in by phone. People swore they saw her walking or being forced into a car or standing at a gas station. Each tip sent a patrol car racing across town. Each time it was nothing. The rookie's face was everywhere, pinned to station walls, taped to diner windows, posted on telephone poles. Still, not one solid lead came in. It was like she had been erased. With no clear evidence, detectives turned to the people. They canvassed neighborhoods, knocking on doors, hopping for one good lead. Some residents claimed they heard cars speeding late that night. Others swore they heard gunshots in the distance, though none could agree on where. One man said he saw a dark sedan parked near the woods, lights off, engine idling. Another insisted he saw two figures arguing by the roadside. Someone else described hearing a woman scream, but the direction changed with every retelling. Detectives wrote it all down, but none of it connected. Each account contradicted the next. Fear began to spread through the town. If a uniformed officer could vanish in plain sight, what about everyone else? Parents locked doors earlier. People avoided driving at night. Rumors swirled in diners and churches. Some whispered it was a gang. Others claimed it was revenge by a criminal she had arrested. The strangest rumor came from inside the department itself, a quiet suggestion that maybe the rookie had run away. That maybe she hadn't been taken, but had chosen to leave. Detectives didn't buy it, not with her empty car, her missing gun, and the silence that followed. But without proof, the rumors only grew louder. When leads dried up, detectives turned to the rookie's family. Her parents sat at their kitchen table, eyes swollen from days without sleep. Detectives asked everything. Did she have problems at home? Was she seeing someone secretly? Did she ever talk about wanting to leave the job? Her mother shook her head. Her father answered with a firm no. Their daughter had wanted nothing more than to serve. She was proud of her badge. She lived for the job. Detectives pressed harder. Were there fights at home, hidden debts, a secret relationship, anything at all? But the answers never changed. Her younger brother finally broke down, slamming his fist on the table. "She didn't run away," he cried. "Someone took her." Detectives wrote their notes, but left with nothing solid. The family wasn't hiding secrets. They were drowning in grief, just like the rest of the department. And still, the rookie was gone. When every outside lead failed, detectives turned inward. For the first time, officers from her own department were called in for questioning. Each was asked where they were that night, who they were with, and if they had seen the rookie before she vanished. Most answered quickly, their stories lining up with dispatch logs, but whispers began to move quietly through the halls. Some officers thought her disappearance didn't add up. Could someone inside know more than they admitted? It was a painful thought. Cops trusted each other with their lives. To suggest one of them was involved was almost unthinkable, yet detectives couldn't rule it out. Anonymous tips even hinted at tension in the department. Small clashes, arguments, and rumors that the rookie might have upset the wrong person. But again, nothing stuck. No proof, just shadows and suspicions. The idea that one of their own could be linked to her disappearance left officers restless. They still wore their badges proudly, but behind closed doors, some looked at each other differently. The rookie had trusted her fellow officers completely. Now detectives wondered if that trust had been betrayed. Days became weeks, weeks slipped into months. At first, her picture was everywhere, taped to walls, pinned on bulletin boards, clipped inside patrol cars. Officers swore they would never stop searching, but slowly the energy faded. Leads stopped coming in. Witness memories grew colder. Patrol shifts returned to routine. Her parents kept calling the station, asking if there was any news. Each time, detectives said the same thing: "We're still working it." But in truth, the trail was gone. One by one, detectives were pulled onto other cases. The rookie's file moved from the front of the desk to the back. Eventually, her photo on the bulletin board curled at the edges, colors fading under fluorescent light. It was still there, but fewer people noticed it. By the end of the year, the case had slipped into cold storage. No answers, no closure, just silence. The rookie cop was gone, and it seemed like the world had already moved on. In the early years, her case was always at the top of the pile. Detectives promised the family they would never stop searching, but time has a way of changing things. After the first year, new cases piled up: robberies, murders, missing children. The rookie's file started sliding further and further back. When detectives retired, they carried the guilt with them. Each new detective who inherited the file opened it, read through the notes, stared at the photos, then put it back into the box. There was simply nothing new to chase. The department moved her file into cold storage, stacked in a row of other boxes. Each one had a name. Each one was a story that never got finished. Her box looked the same as the rest: a cardboard lid, faded ink, dust across the top. At the station, people stopped talking about her. Her picture came down from the bulletin board. New faces filled the academy. Fresh stories replaced old ones. The rookie cop who once made the whole county stop and search had now become just a box on a shelf. Her name wasn't forgotten, but her case, it was no longer alive. For her parents, time moved even slower. Every day, her mother and father waited by the phone, hopping for a call that never came. Each knock on the door made their hearts jump. Maybe this was the news they had been waiting for, but it never was. Holidays were the hardest. Her empty chair sat at the table. Her stocking stayed on the fireplace. Birthdays came and went without her. Her mother kept her room exactly the same: clothes folded neatly, bed made. A photo of her in uniform smiling at graduation sat on the dresser. She couldn't bring herself to touch it. Her father tried to stay strong, but friends noticed the way his shoulders slumped, the way he spoke less every year. At church, people would squeeze his hand and tell him they were praying. He always nodded, but inside he was losing hope. Years turned into decades. They grew old still searching for answers, but none ever came. For her parents, time stopped the night their daughter vanished. And as their hair turned gray, one thought haunted them: they might never know what really happened to her. Inside the police academy, her story never completely disappeared. New recruits were told about her during training. Don't ever let your guard down. Always trust your instincts, instructors warned. Then they'd tell the story of the rookie who vanished. Young officers whispered about her in the locker rooms. Some said she had been kidnapped. Others believed she was betrayed by someone close. Nobody knew for sure, but the mystery made her story even darker. Her name was spoken like a warning, a reminder that the badge didn't make you invincible. It could even make you a target. When rookies rode their first night patrols, some admitted they thought of her. Alone in a dark street, sitting in a car with the radio humming, they wondered if the same thing could happen to them. Her case had become more than a file. It was a ghost story, told in whispers, passed from one generation of officers to the next. Outside the department, the town had its own story to tell. In diners, people leaned over coffee cups and whispered their theories. Some swore the rookie had run off with a secret boyfriend, maybe someone married, maybe someone dangerous. Others believed she was buried somewhere deep in the woods. Hunters claimed they knew spots where nobody ever went, places perfect for hiding a body. Then there were those who thought the truth was darker. They whispered that someone in uniform had silenced her, someone who wore the same badge she did. They said it was the only way to explain why the case had gone nowhere. Each rumor fed the next. Children heard the stories from their parents. Teenagers repeated them at parties by the campfire. The rookie became less of a person and more of a legend, a mystery no one could solve. Whenever her parents walked into church or the grocery store, conversations went quiet. People wanted to ask questions, but they didn't. They were afraid of the answers. In truth, nobody knew what had really happened. But everyone in town carried a version of the story, and none of them ended with the rookie cop coming home. By the late 1990s, the case was little more than a memory. Her photo no longer appeared in the newspaper. News stations stopped mentioning her name. Even the bulletin boards at the station had been cleared. Detectives who once chased her case were gone, retired, or passed away. The young cops now patrolling the streets hadn't even been on the force when she vanished. For them, her story was history. Her parents still hoped, but their voices grew quieter. They had written letters, begged for updates, but now the responses came slower, shorter. In town, life kept moving. New schools were built, stores opened and closed, families came and went. But the rookie's case stayed frozen in the past. By the end of the decade, most people had quietly accepted the truth. She was never coming back. The rookie cop who once filled headlines had become a ghost, slipping further away with each passing year. It was the summer of 2001, more than 20 years after the rookie vanished. A construction crew was breaking ground for a new housing project on the edge of town. The job was routine: bulldozers, backhoes, piles of dirt being cleared for fresh foundations. One morning, as a bulldozer cut into the soil, the blade hit something solid. At first, the operator thought it was just a rock or maybe a buried pipe. But when the machine pulled back, the object glinted in the sunlight. Metal. The crew stopped everything. Curious, a few workers climbed down and began digging by hand. They thought maybe it was old scrap, some forgotten piece of junk left in the ground. But the more dirt they brushed away, the stranger it looked. The shape was small, heavy, and sharp-edged. Not a pipe, not scrap, something different. When the operator finally pulled it free, the men stared in silence. They didn't know exactly what they were holding, but they knew it wasn't normal. Word spread quickly. Someone called the foreman. The foreman called the police. Within the hour, detectives were standing at the site, staring at the object that had just been unearthed. The workers had been right. It wasn't junk. It wasn't a random piece of scrap metal. It was a pistol. The detectives on scene handled it carefully, brushing away the last of the soil. The weapon was old but not destroyed. Time and dirt had preserved it. The serial number was still visible. They ran the number, and within minutes the result came back. Everyone froze. It wasn't just any gun. It was her gun. the rookie's service weapon, the one missing from her patrol car on the night she vanished. The discovery hit the department like a lightning strike. For 21 years, her case had been nothing but silence and rumor. Now, out of nowhere, her weapon had come back to the surface. Detectives sealed the site, marking off the ground like a crime scene. The pistol was collected as evidence, bagged, and sent straight to the lab. For the first time in decades, the case wasn't cold anymore. The gun had been buried. Someone had put it there. And now, after all these years, it had finally been found. News spread through the town like wildfire. For 21 years, the rookie cop's name had been little more than a memory. Now, suddenly, there was a breakthrough. Her service weapon had been found buried in the dirt of a construction site. By noon, people were standing near the caution tape, whispering to one another. Some looked curious. Others looked shaken. A few even looked scared. Older residents remembered the search all those years ago, the helicopters, the bloodhounds, the patrol cars flooding the streets. For them, the gun brought all of that back. It was like reopening an old wound the town had tried to forget. Parents clutched their children tighter. Workers on break stood in small groups, talking about what it meant. Did this prove she was dead? Did it mean someone local had buried the evidence right under their feet? The discovery stirred more than memories. It stirred fear. If her gun was here, what else might be buried? And what kind of person hides a weapon like that, then lives for 2 decades as if nothing happened? For the first time in years, the rookie's case wasn't just a ghost story. It was real again. The call went out, and detectives arrived within minutes. Patrol cars boxed in the construction zone. Yellow tape went up around the dirt pit where the workers had uncovered the pistol. Officers pushed the growing crowd back, while detectives and crime scene techs moved in fast. This wasn't just a random find. This was potential evidence in a 21-year-old case. Every inch of the site had to be treated like a crime scene. Gloved hands collected the weapon, brushing away clumps of soil still clinging to the metal. Photographers snapped pictures from every angle. Evidence markers were placed on the ground, not just where the gun had been, but in the surrounding dirt, in case something else was hidden nearby. Reporters showed up quickly, cameras rolling as investigators carried the sealed bag containing the pistol to a waiting car. Inside the department, phones lit up. Retired detectives called in, demanding updates. Younger officers stared at the news feed in shock. For them, the rookie's case had always been an old rumor. Now it was unfolding right in front of them. After 2 decades of silence, the case had been dragged back into the light, and detectives knew this was only the beginning. At the evidence lab, the pistol was placed on a steel table under bright lights. Technicians began the careful process of cleaning it, documenting every mark, every scratch. The dirt was brushed away, revealing the weapon's details. On the side, faint but still clear, was the stamped serial number. The number was run through the department system. Minutes later, the results came back. There was no mistake. This was the rookie cop's gun. The same gun missing from her patrol car the night she vanished. The same weapon every officer had searched for in 1980. The confirmation hit hard. Detectives who had worked the case decades earlier were called and told the news. Some sat in silence. Others swore under their breath. After all the theories, all the dead ends, here was hard proof that she hadn't just walked away, proof that her disappearance was tied to violence. The weapon didn't lie. It had been with her that night, and whoever buried it knew exactly what they were doing. For the first time in over 20 years, investigators finally had something solid to hold on to. The next step was ballistics. Specialists carefully loaded the old weapon into testing equipment. They fired rounds, then compared the unique markings left on the bullets to archived cases from 1980. Hours turned into days as they combed through records. Finally, a match appeared. The rookie's gun had been fired, and the bullet markings lined up with an unsolved shooting from the same year she disappeared. Back in 1980, officers had responded to gunfire on a side street late one night. By the time they arrived, the scene was empty. They found a shattered window and shell casings, but no shooter. The case had been closed as unresolved. Now, 2 decades later, detectives realized the bullets had come from her service weapon. That detail changed everything. Her gun hadn't just been stolen. It had been used in a crime on the very night she vanished. This wasn't just about a missing officer anymore. This was evidence of an attack, maybe even her murder. And whoever fired that gun had buried it deep, hoping it would never surface again. But it had, and now the secrets were spilling out. The lab didn't just test the gun. They tested the soil clinging to it. Technicians sifted through the dirt carefully, separating out anything unusual. What they found stunned everyone. First, there were faint fingerprints pressed into the weapon, preserved by the compacted soil. They weren't perfect, but they were enough to suggest someone had handled the gun before it was buried. Then came fragments of fabric, tiny threads, no bigger than a fingernail but still intact. The color looked dark, possibly blue or black, close to the shade of a police uniform. And finally, the most chilling discovery, faint traces of blood. Even after 21 years, the soil had sealed it in. The samples were small, but enough for testing. Detectives now had physical evidence that connected the weapon directly to violence. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This was proof that something terrible had happened that night, and someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. The lab packaged everything, the fingerprints, the fabric, the blood samples, and sent it back to detectives. After decades of silence, the dirt itself was finally talking. As detectives reviewed the evidence, one fact became clear. The gun hadn't been lost. It had been hidden. The soil around it showed signs of deliberate burial, packed down firmly, almost like a grave. The construction crew's bulldozer had only uncovered it because the site was being cleared for new homes. Why bury it here? That was the question that haunted investigators. The construction site was near the city center, not far from neighborhoods, schools, and busy roads. Whoever hid the gun hadn't dragged it out into the deep woods or tossed it into a river. Instead, they placed it right under the community's feet. Detectives debated the meaning. Was it convenience, panic, or was it a message? One theory stood out. Maybe the person who buried the weapon had felt safe, even protected, hiding it in plain sight. After all, no one had ever thought to look there. Now, with the weapon unearthed and new evidence in hand, detectives knew one thing for sure. The rookie cop's disappearance wasn't random. Someone close to the case had buried the truth, and it was time to dig it all back up. The final test brought the biggest shock of all. When specialists compared the gun's markings to old case files, they found something that had been overlooked for decades. The rookie's pistol wasn't just linked to her disappearance. It was tied to another shooting that happened in the same year, 1980. Back then, a report had come in about gunfire in a rough part of town. Officers had responded, but when they got there, the shooter was gone. They found broken glass, shell casings, and a shaken witness who swore they'd heard a police-issued weapon, but no suspect was ever caught. That case had been filed away, forgotten as just another unsolved shooting. Now, the ballistics left no doubt. The bullet from that 1980 scene matched her service pistol exactly. For detectives, it was like opening a locked door. This wasn't just evidence that her gun had been used. It showed the weapon had been fired in another crime, a crime that was never tied to her disappearance. The implications were chilling. Had she stumbled onto something that night? Had she been silenced because of what she saw? The rookie's missing gun had carried a secret for 21 years. And now, that secret was finally out. As soon as the gun was identified, old whispers began to resurface. Back in 1980, not long before she disappeared, the rookie had quietly told a friend she was uncomfortable with the way a fellow officer treated her. She said he made comments, followed her around, and wouldn't take no for an answer. She even considered reporting him formally. But at the time she was new, young, a rookie in a department full of older men. Filing a complaint meant risking her job, her reputation, and being branded as trouble. So when she hinted about the harassment, most people brushed it off. Some didn't believe her. Others told her to keep her head down and focus on work. And just like that, her voice was drowned out. Now, decades later, those same whispers returned with force. Detectives revisiting the case noticed that her complaint had never been written down. No official file, no record. Just stories passed between colleagues and family. To investigators, that missing paper trail was suspicious. Had the department deliberately ignored her? Or worse, had someone buried the truth to protect one of their own? For the first time, the possibility could no longer be avoided. Maybe the rookie hadn't fallen to a stranger at all. Maybe the danger had been inside her station. The discovery of her weapon changed everything. Detectives who once looked outward, scanning woods, rivers, and highways, now turned their gaze inward, back at the department itself. They began pulling old personnel files, checking schedules, and interviewing retired officers. Who had been on duty the night she vanished? Who had contact with her last? Patterns emerged. Several names kept surfacing. One officer in particular had a history that didn't look clean. There were notes of arguments, complaints that never went far, transfers that happened suddenly without explanation. Detectives noticed how quickly the rookie's disappearance had gone cold all those years ago. Too quickly. Was it because the leads really dried up, or because someone inside wanted it forgotten? The possibility chilled them. If the killer wore the same badge she did, it meant the rookie had trusted the very person who betrayed her. It meant the department itself had failed her, not just by losing her, but by hiding what really happened. For the first time in 21 years, detectives weren't just chasing a mystery. They were uncovering a betrayal, one that pointed directly back to the men who once called themselves her brothers in blue. Detectives went back to the archives. Dusty boxes that hadn't been touched in years were pulled from shelves. Inside were reports, shift schedules, and interview notes from the days after she vanished. As they sorted through the pages, a clear pattern formed. Certain names appeared again and again, men who had been questioned briefly but never pressed. Back then, their rank or their reputation had been enough to shield them from deeper suspicion. But now those protections no longer mattered. With her gun in evidence, detectives had a reason to dig harder. Files once marked cleared were reopened. Interviews that ended quickly were re-examined. Even retired officers, long gone from the force, were tracked down for questioning. The deeper they went, the stranger it all looked. Why had obvious leads been dropped? Why had her harassment complaints never been recorded? For investigators, it felt less like sloppy police work and more like a wall, a barrier meant to protect someone. And behind that wall, they believed, was the truth about what really happened to the rookie. For the first time, the silence of 1980 began to break. When word leaked that investigators were now focusing on officers from within the department, the public reaction was explosive. For years, the town had believed the rookie was a victim of chance, wrong place, wrong time, taken by some faceless predator. But the new theory was different. It suggested the person who took her wasn't a stranger at all. It could have been someone in uniform, someone trusted to protect them. The thought shook the community. Parents wondered if they had once waved to the very man who betrayed her. Residents asked how such a secret could have stayed hidden for 21 years. Local news outlets ran nightly stories. Headlines accused the department of cover-ups. Talk shows debated whether the police had protected one of their own. For her family, the revelations were devastating, but also strangely comforting. They weren't crazy for thinking something had never added up. Now the truth was finally being pulled into the light. And for the officers still on the force, the whispers turned into something much heavier: suspicion, doubt, and a fear that the badge they wore might now be seen as a symbol of betrayal. Once news spread that the investigation had turned inward, something unexpected happened. Families from the town started calling detectives. One by one, they shared stories that had never made it into official reports. A woman described how her brother, arrested in 1980, claimed a certain officer beat him during questioning. Another family remembered being warned to stay quiet after their daughter had a frightening encounter with a man in uniform. Others told of intimidation, late-night knocks on the door, threats that charges would appear if they didn't cooperate, unexplained visits that left them shaken. At the time, none of these families felt safe enough to complain formally. They feared the officer, and they feared the badge he wore. And when they did try to speak out, their words vanished into thin air, filed away, ignored, or buried under paperwork that went nowhere. Now, decades later, With the rookie's gun finally uncovered, these families felt emboldened. Their voices were no longer alone. Their memories added weight to the growing suspicion that her disappearance wasn't random. To detectives, the pattern was undeniable. Too many people had been silenced for too long. As detectives pieced together the new testimonies, a disturbing history began to take shape. They pulled old logs and compared them with the new accounts. The same officer's name kept appearing. He had been linked to disputes, violent arrests, and complaints that mysteriously vanished. When neighbors or citizens dared to push back, they described being scared into silence. What shocked investigators most was how consistent the stories were. Decades apart from different people who never knew each other, the details lined up almost perfectly. The same behavior, the same threats, the same chilling presence. It was no longer just a theory. A picture was forming of an officer who abused his badge, who created fear instead of safety, and who may have taken things much further when the rookie threatened to expose him. For years, her case had been treated as a mystery. But now, with every file reopened and every family testimony added, the truth was harder to ignore. This wasn't just about one missing rookie. It was about a long pattern of violence that had been allowed to hide in plain sight. The investigation now had a direction that no one wanted to face. For years, people had blamed unknown criminals or imagined some stranger lurking in the shadows. But the evidence told a different story. The rookie hadn't been taken by outsiders at all. The danger had come from inside. Detectives laid out the files, the complaints, the witnesses, and the gun itself. All of it pointed to one chilling conclusion. Her trust in a fellow officer had been her undoing. She had likely confided in the wrong person, or maybe pushed back against the harassment she'd faced, and instead of being protected, she was silenced. The weight of betrayal was heavy. This wasn't just the loss of one rookie cop. It was the collapse of faith in the badge itself. Families asked, if a young officer wasn't safe among her own brothers in uniform, who was? The case was no longer about a missing person. It had become a story of corruption, secrecy, and a system that had failed to protect one of its own. And as detectives prepared for the next step, one thing was clear. The badge that should have protected her had instead been the weapon that destroyed her. When the gun was first pulled from the dirt, detectives knew it could change everything. But they didn't realize just how much until the lab results came back. Inside the soil, preserved for over 2 decades, was DNA. Forensic teams compared it to old samples in the state database. Days later, the report landed on a detective's desk. The name printed at the top made his stomach turn. The DNA matched a man who had once worn the same uniform as the missing rookie. He wasn't just anyone, he had been a fellow officer. Records showed he'd quietly resigned in the early 1980s, not long after she vanished. On paper, it looked like he left for personal reasons. But now, his name was tied directly to the gun she had carried the night she disappeared. Detectives didn't announce it right away. They went back through his file, his history, every complaint ever whispered about him. Suddenly, the rumors from decades earlier, the harassment claims, the unexplained violence, the intimidation, all came flooding back. For the first time, there was no denying it. The rookie's disappearance wasn't random. The evidence pointed straight at someone she should have been able to trust. The name from the DNA report wasn't just another officer. It was someone who had known the rookie personally. People who remembered them said he was always around her, always a little too close. At the time, it hadn't seemed strange. She was new and he was more experienced. Maybe he was just helping her adjust. But looking back, the connection felt different, unsettling. Detectives dug through old rosters and training schedules. They found that the rookie and this officer had worked the same shifts. He had even volunteered to patrol with her during her first months on the job. To everyone else, it looked like mentorship. But to her, maybe it felt like pressure. Witnesses came forward, recalling how the rookie had once mentioned feeling uncomfortable with his attention. She didn't use the word stalking. She didn't even call it harassment. But she hinted she didn't like being alone with him. Those words, ignored in 1980, now carried a chilling weight. The DNA wasn't some random fluke. It was tied to a man who had been right beside her during her short career. someone she likely trusted at first, someone she couldn't have imagined would ever betray her. And now, detectives had to face the possibility that her final moments weren't spent fighting a stranger in the dark, but a man she already knew. When detectives finally confronted the former officer, he didn't flinch. Sitting across the table, he looked calm, almost bored, as if the entire meeting was a waste of his time. They laid out the evidence, the gun, the DNA, the history, but he shook his head. "It's a mistake," he said firmly. "That can't be my DNA. You've mixed something up." His tone wasn't panicked. It was controlled, steady. Detectives pressed harder. They reminded him that the weapon had been buried for 21 years. They explained that the technology didn't lie. Still, he kept his story the same. "I had nothing to do with her disappearance. You're trying to pin this on me because you've got nothing else." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, almost daring them to prove more. To him, denial was his shield. Without a body, without direct witnesses, he believed the case was weak. But detectives weren't fooled. His confidence felt rehearsed. His calmness wasn't natural. It was the calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment for decades. They knew denial was only the beginning. What they needed now was someone, anyone, who could put him with the rookie on the night she vanished. And quietly, they began looking. Detectives didn't stop after the denial. They went back through old notes, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. That's when they found names, people who had been interviewed briefly in 1980 but whose statements never made it into the final report. One by one, these people were tracked down again, and this time, with fresh eyes on the case, their stories sounded different. Several remembered seeing the rookie and the officer together on the very night she vanished. Some saw them near the station, talking in the parking lot. Others swore they spotted them driving in the same patrol car, even though they hadn't been assigned together. In 1980, those small details hadn't seemed important. Detectives back then were focused on kidnappers, drifters, or random criminals. But now, in light of the DNA, the sightings felt explosive. They placed the suspect directly with the rookie on her last night alive. These accounts didn't prove murder, but they destroyed his claim that he wasn't connected. The truth was becoming harder for him to deny. Then came a witness no one had taken seriously before. In 1980, she had called in a strange report, hearing gunshots late at night near the wooded edge of town. Back then, police dismissed it. Gunshots weren't unusual in rural areas. Hunters, target practice, fireworks, all common excuses. But now, detectives asked her to describe exactly where she had been that night. She pointed to a stretch of land that had long since been developed. The housing project, the same area where the construction crew had dug up the rookie's pistol. Her voice shook as she told the story again. She remembered the cracks of gunfire, sharp, close, echoing through the trees. Then silence. No engines, no voices, just silence. For 21 years her warning had been ignored, but now it matched the evidence perfectly. The gun found in that very soil, fired, buried, and left. Suddenly, what once sounded like a harmless report was now a chilling confirmation. The rookie's last moments likely ended right there. Detectives began laying the evidence out in order, like puzzle pieces on a table. The rookie had started her patrol as scheduled, checked in over the radio, and made no sign of distress. Then she was last seen speaking with the officer who would later resign. Multiple witnesses placed them together that night, something he denied. From there, the timeline grew darker. The witness who heard gunshots placed the sounds near the area where her pistol was eventually found. That meant she was likely taken there. Her gun was fired, then buried. The evidence suggested no random ambush, no unknown drifter pulling her off the road. Instead, every piece pointed inward. She had been lured, not forced. She had trusted the man beside her because he wore the same badge. That trust became the weapon used against her. Detectives now believed she was betrayed not by chance, but by someone she thought was a brother in blue. The betrayal explained why the case went cold for decades. Who would suspect one of their own? The puzzle wasn't solved yet, but the picture was becoming painfully clear. By now, the truth could no longer be ignored. The DNA, the witnesses, the buried gun, the old complaints, they all pointed to one man. A man who had once sworn to protect her, who had worked the same streets, worn the same badge, saluted the same flag. The rookie hadn't been ambushed by strangers hiding in the dark. She had been betrayed in the worst way possible. The person she trusted with her life, the person she called partner, turned out to be the one who ended it. For detectives, this realization was devastating. For her family, it was worse. They had prayed for years that she had not suffered, that her killer was some faceless monster. Learning it was a fellow officer, someone she knew, cut even deeper. The case was no longer about just a missing rookie. It had become a story of corruption, silence, and betrayal from within. And for the first time in 21 years, the truth of what happened on that night in 1980 was finally in sight. It had been more than 2 decades since the rookie cop vanished. For years, her case sat in cold storage, treated like a ghost story. But now the ghost had a name, and police were ready to act. Detectives secured the warrant. Early one morning, they drove to the quiet home of the former officer who had once served beside her. He was older now, living a normal life, pretending the past was buried. But when squad cars pulled into his driveway, lights flashing, the silence of 21 years shattered. Neighbors came outside, shocked to see police surrounding one of their own. He stepped onto the porch, trying to stay calm, but the handcuffs clicked shut. For the first time, the man who had been whispered about in rumors was officially charged. Inside the station, some officers could barely believe it. The rookie's case had always been a mystery, a story told to new recruits like a warning. But now it was real again. Files were reopened, evidence laid out, and the weight of what happened all those years ago became undeniable. After 21 years, the case was no longer a rumor. It was justice beginning to take shape. When detectives called the family, the news hit like a storm. After 21 years of waiting, they finally had answers. The man arrested wasn't a stranger. He had worn the same uniform as their daughter. He had stood beside her. And now he was accused of ending her life. At first, there was relief. For decades, they had begged for progress, prayed for a break. Now the silence was broken. But almost immediately, the relief turned heavy. They realized one truth had not changed. Her body was still missing. They would never know exactly where she spent her final moments. Her mother cried as she told reporters, "We finally know who, but we still don't know where she is." Her father sat quietly, holding a folded photo of her in uniform, the same one that had hung on the wall for years. For the family, justice was finally in sight, but closure was still far away. Holidays would still have an empty chair. Birthdays would still pass without her smile. They could not bury their daughter. They could not bring her home. The arrest gave answers, but it did not end the grief. The trial became the biggest case the county had seen in years. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Reporters lined the back wall. The family sat together in the front row, holding each other's hands. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. The recovered gun, the DNA preserved in the soil, the fingerprints, the witnesses who came forward, remembering what they saw and heard that night. Step by step, the picture became clear. The rookie cop had trusted a fellow officer, and that trust had cost her life. The defense tried to fight back. They argued the evidence was old. They said memories fade. They claimed the case was built on mistakes and assumptions. But the jury listened closely. The details didn't lie. The ballistics matched. The DNA matched. The timeline matched. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. The former officer was found guilty on all major charges. After more than 2 decades, the secret he had carried was finally destroyed. The family wept, some with relief, others with grief. Justice had come, but it could never give them back what they had lost. The rookie's story had finally been told and believed. Inside the police department, the verdict landed like a bomb. Officers who had worn the same badge, shared the same locker rooms, and trusted the same man now had to face the truth. One of their own had been a predator. The rookie's disappearance had haunted the department for years. Many officers had joined long after she vanished, hearing her story only as a rumor, a cold case spoken about in hushed tones. Now, it was no rumor. The killer had walked their halls, worn their uniform, and stood among them. Trust shattered overnight. Younger cops asked hard questions. How had complaints been ignored? Why had warning signs been dismissed? Older officers, some retired, had to admit they remembered whispers, but they chose silence. The shame was heavy. A formal review of old cases was ordered. Every file connected to the convicted officer was reopened. Investigators searched for other victims, other signs of corruption that might have been buried. The department's leadership issued public apologies, vowing change. But inside, the wound ran deep. For the men and women still serving, the case became a permanent scar. They promised each other never again to ignore a voice asking for help, never again to let loyalty blind them to danger. The rookie's betrayal wasn't just a crime. It was a reminder. Even a badge could hide darkness. At the academy, the story of the rookie became a lesson carved into tradition. Every class of new recruits sat in a plain room with photographs on the wall, pictures of officers lost in the line of duty. Among them was her face. Young, eager, proud. The instructors would point to it and tell the truth. She had not been killed by a stranger. She had not fallen in some heroic battle with criminals. She had been betrayed from within, by someone she trusted, by someone wearing the same uniform. The recruits sat silent when they heard it. They were told that loyalty to the badge was important, but it should never come at the cost of ignoring danger. If someone was being threatened, if harassment was happening, if an officer seemed unstable, silence was not loyalty. Silence was deadly. Her story was repeated over and over because it was more than a warning. It was a test of character. Would these new officers stand up against one of their own if it came to that? Would they protect the vulnerable, even if the threat was another badge? Instructors reminded them that police work wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about integrity inside the department. A rotten officer could do more harm than any stranger on the street. Her disappearance, and the decades of silence that followed, had shown exactly that. Some recruits left those sessions shaken. They looked at her picture, her hopeful smile, and realized how fragile the line of trust could be. Others felt angry that no one had stood up for her when she needed it most. That anger drove them to promise they would never allow history to repeat itself. Years later, some of those same recruits would still remember the lesson word for word. They carried it into their careers, telling younger officers the same story. They would say, "Remember her. She trusted the badge and the badge turned its back on her. Don't let that happen again." Her case became more than a cold file. It became a symbol, a reminder that justice begins not only with chasing criminals but with holding each other accountable. The rookie's name lived on in classrooms, in locker rooms, in whispered warnings at midnight patrol briefings. She was gone, but her story never left. When the case finally closed, the town and the department knew they couldn't just let her fade into another cold file. She had been a rookie, barely starting her career, and her life had been stolen before she ever got the chance to serve the way she dreamed. The officers who trained with her, the families who prayed for her return, and the community that followed her case for decades all agreed. Her name deserved a place of honor. A memorial stone was set in the courtyard outside the police station. It was simple, cut from dark granite. Her name was carved deep into the surface, along with the year she disappeared. At the bottom, a short line read, "Gone but never forgotten." The first time the stone was unveiled, dozens of officers lined the walkway in silence. Her parents, now old and frail, stood in front of it, their hands trembling as they touched her name. Many in the crowd cried openly. It wasn't the ending anyone had wanted, but it was a promise that she would always be remembered. From that year forward, her name became part of the annual memorial service for fallen officers. Every spring, a ceremony was held in the courtyard. One by one, names of those lost in the line of duty were read aloud. When they reached hers, there was always a pause. Everyone knew her story was different. She hadn't been ambushed by strangers or killed in a shootout. She had been betrayed by someone who should have protected her. The pause was deliberate, a moment to let the weight of her story sink in. Then a bell was rung once for her, like it was for every other fallen officer. Younger recruits who never knew her often asked why her name was spoken every year. The older officers explained. They said it was about more than honoring her. It was about remembering what silence cost. It was about making sure no one else slipped through the cracks because people were too afraid to speak. Even today, flowers still appear at the base of her stone. Some are left by her family, others by strangers who only know the story. People pass through the courtyard and stop for a moment, reading her name, wondering what she might have become if her first patrol shift hadn't ended the way it did. Her memorial stands not just as a tribute but as a reminder. She may have been young, she may have been a rookie, but her story reshaped an entire department. And every time her name is spoken, it ensures she is never forgotten. Even after the trial ended and the former officer was sent away, the story didn't leave the town. People still whispered about it in diners, at barbershops, in quiet talks after church. The case wasn't just about a missing rookie anymore. It had become part of the town's identity, and at the center of it all was the weapon, the single piece of evidence that had dragged the truth back into the light after more than 2 decades. The construction site where the pistol was found never felt the same. On the surface, it looked like any other patch of new homes. Kids rode bikes down fresh sidewalks, families moved in, grass grew where dirt had once been torn up by bulldozers. But to the locals, the ground itself carried a shadow. Workers who had been there the day the gun was unearthed often said they could still picture the moment. The clank of metal against steel, the confused looks, the slow realization that this wasn't just junk buried in the dirt. It was the missing piece of a story that had haunted the community for 21 years. Even now, some people say they avoid driving past that block. Others admit they slow down, staring at the row of houses, wondering which patch of earth had once held the secret. Parents tell their children the story, using it as a warning about trust, loyalty, and the weight of silence. The gun itself, once cleaned and logged, became more than just a piece of evidence. Detectives described it as the object that spoke when no one else would. For years, everyone had theories, guesses, rumors, but the pistol cut through the noise. Its serial number shouted her name. Its fingerprints pointed to her betrayer. Its bullets tied one crime to another. In the end, it was an object in the dirt that carried a voice louder than all the rumors combined. Officers who worked the cold case later admitted that the weapon changed how they looked at every unsolved file. If one clue buried for decades could bring down a murderer, maybe other secrets still waited under the weight of time. The gun gave them hope, but it also reminded them that truth sometimes hides where no one expects it. For the rookie's family, the weapon was both a blessing and a curse. It gave them answers, proof of what happened, and justice in a courtroom, but it also forced them to relive the betrayal. The pistol didn't bring her back. It didn't give them her remains to bury. It only confirmed what they had feared in their hearts, that her final night ended in violence carried out by someone she had trusted. Today, people say you can't pass the construction site without thinking about it. Some feel anger, others sorrow. But no one forgets. The houses may look normal, but the story underneath them is carved into memory. The weapon buried in the dirt didn't just solve a case. It forced an entire community and an entire department to face the truth. In the end, the gun told her story when no one else could, and that story will never be buried again.